Hello Math 152 students. In this video, we're going to take a look at the grading rubric for the project. I want to use this video to address some frequently asked questions and clarify some points in the rubric so that you guys are prepared to make your reports as good as they can possibly be. So let's start at the beginning. The first 5 points that you'll be awarded is for the project topic approval form. Everybody has already completed this part, so there's nothing else to do. And then the next parts address what is in the 4 sections of your paper. So I want you to think about these 4 sections: the introduction, the data collection, the data analysis and results, and the reflection as the 4 headers. You actually should put 4 unique and labeled sections, label them: introduction, data collection, data analysis and results, and then reflection. Label them like that, and you will include what is bullet pointed. Okay, so don't think about it as just one big paper. Think about it as 4 subsections that should be labeled, and in each subsection, I will be using these points to assess and grade that section. So for the introduction, you want to give me a description, but also include your initial hypothesis for what you think is going to happen. The introduction will most likely be 1 to 2 paragraphs. This does not need to be very much longer than that. A short introduction is perfectly acceptable. Then the data collection section, you will need to describe how the data was gathered, whether you were doing a survey, if you were collecting data from stores, or gathering data from websites. You want to describe how it was done. Make sure you use the vocabulary, discuss sampling methods, whatever is relevant to your project. Then it does indicate that the raw data should be attached to the end. For example, if you gathered lots of prices from Walmart and Target, I don't want to see a list of 150 items and the prices in your data collection section. You want to put that at the end. You do want to, however, indicate how much data you collected so that I can identify whether or not you met the minimum data requirement that was discussed in the project description page. So make sure you're looking back at the project description for some of these things. All right, so, the other thing, if you did give a survey, put a copy of the survey at the end, or if it's a short enough survey, you can actually put it directly in the data collection section, whichever one seems more appropriate. For the data analysis and results, this is the section with the most points, and it's going to have the largest kind of statistics component. Think about this as where all the heavy lifting and all your numbers, confidence intervals, hypothesis testing, and analysis is really going to go. So the first bullet point is a summary table. Here we emphasize that the raw data should be attached at the end. And throughout the entire project, there's 2 options. Your project will either deal with proportions or means. And you want to pay special attention to which guideline you're following. For example, if you're dealing with proportions, then all you can really report for your summary is your sample size and your number of successes, like the number of yeses and nos. That's a very, very brief summary table. If your project is dealing with means, you can now StatCrunch to find the mean standard deviation of your data set, also such things as a 5-number summary. You are welcome to copy and paste some of these things directly from StatCrunch, particularly if the formatting is nice for your mean standard deviation and 5-number summary. You can also retype it in a summary table just directly into Word or whatever word processing editor you're using. So you can include more than what I ask for here. If you think something else, perhaps like the median if your project deals with means, or the range, you can include other things. These are just the minimum of what I want to see. After your summary table, you want to give me graphs. So for the graphical descriptions, again, it differs between proportions and means. For proportions, at least 1 chart. And here we're thinking bar chart, displaying number of yeses and number of nos, perhaps including your total. Pie charts are also excellent when you're dealing with yes and no type data. Lends itself very nicely to creating a clean result. However, if your project is dealing with means and you have 150 prices, you are better off using a histogram and possibly a box plot. So here, create both. A lot of times you'll be able to tell which seems more appropriate. Another thing to be aware of in this section is the type of test you're running. For example, if you're running a one sample means test, meaning you have one column of data and you're comparing to a prior value, like we saw in chapters 9 and 10 with confidence intervals and hypothesis testing, you might only have one single box plot and one single histogram. However, if you're dealing with chapter 11 and you're looking at paired data, you want to make sure you revisit those chapter 11 videos, because for paired data, we looked at differences and created box plots out of the differences. Or maybe even think about histograms and think about the histograms of the differences. If your project is dealing with independent samples with means, then you might have 2 histograms and 2 box plots. So you really want to stop and ask yourself, what is appropriate if you're dealing with means? Is it 1 sample? Is it 2? And what is the best representation? If you happen to be dealing with 2 samples with proportions, you can also see stuff in chapter 11 relating to that. I think most of the project descriptions I saw with proportions were 1 proportion, but there may be some groups with 2 samples in there. So this next point, you want to make sure you're not just creating graphs to give me graphs. Pick and choose and edit the graphs that you give me so that they enhance the understanding of the data. If it doesn't make sense to create the graph or it doesn't help us, don't include it. Then all your tables and graphs should be labeled, and you may want to write 1 to 2 sentences underneath as a description if it's not clear from your title. The other thing that we'll transition to in this section is the confidence intervals and hypothesis testing. Before you launch into writing a confidence interval, you need to check your conditions for whether the underlying distribution is normal or whether we have enough data to not need to check that. So what do we mean by conditions for normalcy? Here, if you're dealing with proportions, we have the n times p times 1 minus p is bigger than 10. And for means, we either needed greater than 30 data points, or if we're less than 30, we needed to look at our QQ plots and our box plot. So you need to address that. Since you are given requirements for how much data you collected, you should be able to have those conditions satisfied. But you need to state that before you launch into your confidence interval and hypothesis test. So you can use StatCrunch to create your confidence interval and include it. Write me a sentence description of what this confidence interval is saying, and then test your original hypothesis. Here, you need to include or reiterate your initial claim, the setup. You want to write out your null and alternative using the symbols, just like we did in the chapter 10 and 11 problems. Mention your conditions, which most of them were probably checked up here with your conditions for normalcy. If there's any others, mention those conditions. Obtain your p-value. Make sure you've stated an alpha. Most of you are probably going to use the alpha equals 0.05 level, unless there's some other reason that you would choose a different alpha. The 0.05, you can think about that as an appropriate default. So this whole section, including the claim, the setup, the conditions, p-value, and alpha, think about organizing this similar to how I did in the videos in 10 and 11. It doesn't have to all be a paragraph. You can list them out, even kind of do subheaders, claim, setup, include your hypotheses, conditions, p-value, and then go ahead and interpret your conclusion in everyday language. So if some of this is more bullet pointed, you do want to follow up with a full sentence, writing an explanation in the context of the problem. Then, after you've presented your summary table, your graphs, your confidence interval, and hypothesis testing, if there's any other analysis that you feel is appropriate, your group might have something like a scatter plot, depending on if you created your own topic. You might have some other interesting things you want to analyze. Include that here, and then wrap it up with a paragraph summarizing what you found, and make sure you answer if your hypothesis was correct or not. So depending on how many charts and graphs and how you format your hypothesis test, this section could be up to several pages. There's no minimum length, there's no maximum length, but you want to make it as organized and concise as possible. I'm not looking for you to add lots of extra flowery things in here. What I'm looking for is to be able to easily find everything that I'm looking for on my checklist. Last section is your reflection. This should be 1 to 2 paragraphs. So you might want to think about if there was anything that caused major problems, if you felt that something caused your data to be inaccurate, there's something you would do different, and sort of if there was anything significant, unexpected, or that you learned that you weren't expecting to find with this project, that's an appropriate place to put it. The final part of the rubric deals with the formatting, grammar, punctuation. So the first point should be very easy points. The 4 sections are labeled, and I can find everything. Okay, you will lose points if you have poor organization, poor grammar, spelling, punctuation, but think about these as it's not going to be scrutinized quite like an English paper, but sloppiness will lose you points. Think about the level of this. You want to target it to almost a fellow classmate. If someone had not had any experience with hypothesis testing and confidence intervals, they would not be able to fully understand your analysis section. But someone who's in a different Math 152 class should be able to read and understand what you've done and follow it easily. So last thing I want to do is just discuss the points. If you add up the points on your rubric, you could total 85. So I'll just take the number of points your group earned, divide by 85. That is the highest grade your group can earn. The last part of the rubric details the points that you could potentially lose if you do not participate. So after the projects are turned in next week, I will open up your team evaluation and you will score your group members. So I will send your project grade to each individual, but also their individual team member grade based on the ratings. So make sure that as you are working together as a team, if you are not participating, you could end up getting ratings of 0s or 1s from your team, and this is going to give you pretty big point deductions. The other thing is not submitting an evaluation for yourself also will lose you points. So everyone is expected to do this and expected to evaluate every single other person in your group. All right, so there's an example just for you to read through, and then tells you your average score and how many points would be deducted. So the best you could do, if everyone scores you at a 3, you would get the group grade. If your group scores you at a 0, meaning you didn't participate at all, you will have a pretty major point deduction from your final project grade. And again here, if you don't submit the group evaluation, you'll lose these 10 points, just right off the top. All right, guys, so I think I addressed the frequently asked questions that were emailed to me. If you have additional questions or concerns, please shoot me an email and I will get back to you this weekend and hopefully clarify some of those issues as you're wrapping up your report.